This is Kevin Park for English 223, Stoats Gauche. It is February 19th, 2023, and this piece is entitled That's So Judas, and this is take 42. I loved being a stage manager. I adored the intimacy of a small black box theater space, a space where 60 patrons was a packed house. No matter where you sat as an audience member, you could always smell the sweat on the actors and hear the buzzing of the stage lights as they faded in and out. I loved being surrounded by talent, actors and directors that together could make something real that maybe they couldn't produce on their own. I enjoyed the mounting of a new production. While being a stage manager, deep down I knew I wanted to direct theater, but felt like I was too young and inexperienced to do so. By stage managing, I could study these directors at work and hone my style, and when the time came to produce a show that I yearned to be a part of, like The Elephant Man, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or Vonnegut's Mother Night, I would be able to throw my hat in the ring and direct with confidence. When I think about my 20s and reflect on my involvement in the local theater scene, I always end up looking at it in two completely different ways. They were either the best, most creative years of my life, or it's as if I had served time for a crime that I did not commit, and now that I was out, I was never going to go back. From this time, there is one production that I was a part of that always stands out, filling me with emotions from both of those camps. Terrence McNally's Corpus Christi. The play, which is a beautiful play, dramatizes the story of Jesus. In this piece, he's referred to as Joshua and his apostles. But in this telling, they are all gay men, spreading the same message of peace, love, and the Lord throughout Texas in the early 1990s. As one might expect, it goes as well for Joshua as it did for Jesus. At the time, Corpus Christi was quite the hot new play, and it was very controversial, which is exactly why it was being staged in town. A new production company was started by a local actor and director that the theater community had given the appropriate nickname of Ursula. Ursula was banking on the controversy and hype of McNally's play to help promote her inaugural season. I selfishly thought that if I got in good with Ursula, now maybe I could work my way onto her selection committee of plays for next year's season and then be directing what I wanted to be directing in no time at all. This new theater was located in downtown Kalamazoo. The space was on the second floor of a building that reminded me of old restaurants that had a non-smoking section on one side, and then completely on the other side of the building was a smaller, smellier smoking section. This theater would have been above the smoking section. On the first floor, in the pictured non-smoking section, was another great little venue, a coffee shop, and they would have live bands and events go on as soon as our stage productions were done downstairs. In the middle of the building was this wide open staircase which caused sound to carry at an alarming rate, so both venues had to be mindful of each other's sound levels. This production featured several of my friends in the cast as apostles. My old friend Scott got the lead role of Joshua. The role of Judas went to a seasoned performer in town, a gentleman by the name of RJ. I didn't know RJ well, but had seen him in a few productions around town, and had no doubt that he could portray a perfect Judas, especially with that snidely whiplash mustache of his. Rehearsals lasted for roughly 5 weeks, and the play ran for 3 weekends. I don't remember much of the actual productions. I recall we had no more than 60 seats, and I feel as if we did a decent job of filling them. Our final night's production is an absolute blur to me, and yet the emotions of that night can still wake me from a dead sleep. As a stage manager, one of the grunt jobs is checking in your actors as they arrive. Yep, that's right. I got to take attendance. Talent was to show up an hour before showtime, which was 8 p.m., so that's a 7 o'clock call time. If one was not there by 7:10, I'm looking up their phone numbers. And if nothing changes, by 7:15, I'm making the call. And I'm calling every 5 minutes until they walk up to me and say, "Here, present," or I'm here, my God, traffic was murder. Did anyone else get stopped by the goddamn train?" Anything like that. On that final night of Corpus Christi, at 7:15, I'm calling RJ. Our Judas has yet to show. I leave a message. 5 minutes later, and I'm leaving another message. This operation continues up to what would be my final message at 7:40, when Ursula handed me her copy of the script and said, "Start reading. You're Judas now." To this day, I have never felt the same levels of stress, anxiety, rage, and nerves as I did that night. I confined myself to a corner near the tech board, just trying to go over the lines, highlighting the pages, reading, and trying to memorize all at the same time. Only a few pages in, I realized that I was wasting my time using a yellow highlighter. I was now playing Judas, for God's sakes. That's way too much to highlight. Before our patrons started to funnel in, the actors that were my friends would come up to me and try and talk to me about what was going on, like I hadn't heard that I was now playing Judas. Ursula muscled the actors backstage and left me to put my face in the book and do the best that I could. I started to wonder why Ursula wasn't jumping in at the chance to save the day. She was an actor and she knew the piece better than anyone outside of the writer. Hell, she had already cast herself as the lead in half the plays that she would produce that season. Why me? Oh well, can't change anything now. Being stage manager meant that I was there for every rehearsal and every production. I was the first to show up and the last to leave, and this element would be my saving grace. I was familiar enough with the play. I didn't have it memorized, but I recognized that I wasn't going out there completely blind. That was reassuring. It still didn't prevent me from breaking out in hives due to all the stress. Both my arms and my neck grew deep red and irritated. I felt like I was on fire. That's the only time I can recall that ever happening to me. I don't recommend it to anyone. It's a very painful, irritating way of your body telling you that all of your expletives are messed up. 8 p.m. arrived. Lights went up, and whether I liked it or not, it was showtime. I have no recollection of my performance. For the most part, I only recall those moments when I exited the stage and immediately pulled the script out of my pocket to see what was next. There is only one moment from Corpus Christi that I vividly remember my performance in, and that was in the scene where Judas and Joshua kiss. Scott, the actor portraying Joshua, and I had been friends for a long time. As a matter of fact, Scott was the gatekeeper that got me into the local theater scene in the first place. Pardon me. I can recall being on stage with him and feel like I was actually performing with him, not just reading lines. Two friends playing together, enjoying the moment. That's the reason most of us try out for theater in the first place. I was having fun, and for a brief time, I was lost in the wonders of the play. Then, our characters kissed, and my mouth was filled with the horrors of Scott's cigarette smoke and the stench from a dish I can only describe as tuna egg. I was repulsed. Any acting that I had poured out of me that night had now recoiled back into a man who no longer wanted to be on stage. All I could think was, "Oh, RJ, you betrayed us. That's so Judas." The show goes on, and I give a performance that I'm sure would be considered passable. In what felt like no time at all, we reach the final scene. The lights fade out, only to come back up on all of us as we take in the applause from our audience. I let out a sigh of relief that hasn't been heard since Nixon boarded the helicopter that took him away from the White House in disgrace. I didn't die. Thank God. We exit the stage, and I immediately go back into stage manager mode. Ursula and the actors go out to greet the audience, which is primarily made up of friends and family of her and the cast. I had no one in the audience that night. That's typically how it goes for tech crew. Our friends and family, they love us and support us, but they don't pay $10 to see us perform backstage. I begin shutting things down. I stack the chairs and I clean up the house. Everyone had made their way downstairs. I can hear muffled music coming from the amps and speakers from the venue below. Roughly 25 minutes after our final curtain call, I turn off the lights and I make my way downstairs. And there, waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, was the entire cast and most of our patrons giving me a standing ovation. Technically, they were already standing, but that's a standing ovation nonetheless. I'll take the win. I was completely overwhelmed. It almost made the hives worth it. Almost. It went from being one of the most nauseating and agitating evenings of my life to a moment that I will cherish for as long as I can hold on to my memories. 20 years on, and I still have no idea what happened to RJ that night. In the theater world, most love to gossip and gab, and over the years, I've heard everything from it was drug related, to he slept in, to he was working a double shift, to he and Ursula having a cat fight over something childish, and was his way of sticking it to her. All of these reasons had surfaced for him bowing out that final night. I had even heard that he was a no-show because he wrapped his Vespa scooter around Jim Brewer's tour bus. Now, if none of you know who Jim Brewer is, you're in a better place than most. Personally, I have my own thought on the matter. I like to think that he didn't show that night because he wanted me to do it. Because he knew, deep down, I could do it. That's utter nonsense, but it makes me feel better about the situation. He knew only one actor could fill his shoes, and I was that guy. More importantly, it was for me to have that moment in the spotlight to tell me that I'm ready. I don't need to play second fiddle to these other directors. I can mount Cuckoo's Nest now and do a fine job. It was to tell me that I'm worthy of a standing ovation. Recently, I took my daughter to a local production here in town, and there on stage, amongst the ensemble players, was RJ. And he was great. Here was a man who I could tell loved being on stage, who adores the limelight, who yearns to play. He looked as if the only way he could be forced off stage would be by one of those old-timey hooks that they used in vaudeville days. The look of bliss and joy on his face told me that his reasons for missing that final performance had to have been dire. I admit I always carried a bit of resentment towards him for that night. I always thought if I saw him, I'd thank him for the opportunity and express to him what that standing ovation did for me, but to do it in a smug and condescending way. You know, like a local theater actor. Watching him on stage, I recognized an actor who must have been dealing with issues that ultimately were none of my concern. And inevitably, what happened that night happened. Now my resentment was gone. However, my smug demeanor still remains. Our production of Corpus Christi was nothing more than a blip in the local theater history books. Not that anyone would ever care to read that book. Near the end of this production, there was a moment on stage when RJ's character had to smooch one of the other actors. I recognized in that moment there was another reason why RJ may have deserted us that night. He couldn't take another curtain call of his mouth tasting like tuna egg. RJ, my man, I totally get it. Thank you.